Most of us never learned how to train our brains, which is why most of us needlessly settle, struggle, and worse, suffer. My name is Chris Doris, and I want to make brain training mainstream. This is my series, Tough Talks, Conversations on Mental Toughness. I'm interviewing badasses from all walks of life on what mental toughness means to them and their unique approaches to strengthening their minds. Hey everybody, welcome back to Tough Talks with Chris Doris. I'm extremely pumped today to finally get one of the most, we'll say it this way, the most interesting woman in the world. Absolutely one of the most interesting, fascinating people I've ever met. I love knowing Liese. We got to travel together, and I joined you on one of the projects you work on is called the Foundation for Global Leadership. And what was it, 6 years ago maybe? We went to 6 Southern African countries together. And right now, you know, as we speak, I'm working on my all-in digital course. I'm making a course out of the audio program. And, you know, one of the things that we did on the trip, one of the things that I did on the trip, which was organized by Eileen Rogers, was the rafting, right? The whitewater rafting on the Zambezi, which is amazing. And then, you know, the guide stopped on the Zimbabwe side, and we had the opportunity to jump off this cliff.
I was going to say, didn't you jump off a cliff? Because that's what I recall, which is not actually a safe thing to do in hippo and croc-infested waters. But, you know, it's a Chris Doris kind of thing to do.
Well, it was actually Eileen's idea, I think. At least it was the river raft guide's idea. And being as egotistical as I am, there was no way that I could pass on that, right? Because I would be berating myself. But anyway, the point is that there was a photographer there who captured the whole leap, which is a perfect metaphor for going all in, right? Making the leap of faith, and once you jump, there's no turning back. So anyway, we're working on that right now. So thanks to you for that. That was a life-altering experience of mine. So the Foundation for Global Leadership. So just reading from your LinkedIn profile, bio, specializes in learning journeys for business leaders who are ready to expand their leadership potential beyond the confines of a classroom, and that's for damn sure, unless you consider the classroom real life. Our learning journeys combine spectacular life-changing adventures, which I can certainly attest to, typically not available to tourist kinds of things, with an opportunity to engage with leading innovators solving social issues. Now that's one way that I would describe you. If someone says, what does Jelaine do? I would say she is an extremely enlightened, conscious, global thinking social activist. Would that be accurate to you?
Well, yes, and especially at that time period. I'm no longer, actually, I no longer have that company. I've now moved on to, I have now a different company. That. But yes, I mean, back then when I was doing the Foundation for Global Leadership, the purpose was I've always believed in relationships, and was to connect business leaders with social entrepreneurs, and knowing that if the two got together, then life-altering things would occur.
And you're right. You were definitely right about that. So just a heads up, your LinkedIn profile says that that's still an active organization. Just saying.
Really? Because that's supposed to have been changed like months ago.
No, it says from 2002 to now or something like that, till present. Just FYI.
No.
Anyway, okay. But thank you for that, because it changed my life. But this is, I just wanted, before we move on to what you're currently doing, this is a really powerful sentence here. It says, you know, all of this occurs on these trips that you organized with people. The opportunities that you created for them to have that would expand their awareness of what is going on in the world, all within the context that encourages reflection on the questions: how has my life been impacted because of the world I live in, and how do I want to impact the world because I have lived in it? And I just think those are beautiful and powerful, some of the most powerful questions that you could ever ask. So thank you for having created that. Thank you for having included me in that, and all, you know, the growth that has occurred for me from that experience. I still refer to, I mean, there were so many experiences on that trip that I continue to refer to. Now, moving on, you are the founder of Equanimity Leadership Solutions. Okay, and I just want to read this little bit from the bio, the explanation of that. So, you've always been about leadership. You've always been about, you know, cross-cultural, the world. You've been about the world. You have a global consciousness. Your bachelor's degree from ASU is in cross-cultural communication. Your master's degree from Prescott College is cross-cultural counseling. And your doctoral degree from the Union Institute is in community psychology. Everything is community, is cross-cultural connectivity, right? So the equanimity leadership solutions, let's see, so you say in your description of that the transition, your work in developing, helping leaders get more out of their people and their organizations, the transition from pain to performance, right, begins with, and I'll finish that in a second, but I love that pain to performance, because, you know, as a performance psychologist, right, as a mental toughness coach, as somebody who's spent my life helping people get more out of themselves by strengthening their minds, I love that whole pain to performance description. Like that's a journey yeah. from pain to actual performance, which suggests that those two don't coexist, and they don't. Because if you examine all of human peak performance research, every single shred of it indicates that when humans are performing at peak, they're not experiencing suffering. Maybe physical pain, maybe like climbing Mount Everest, right? But not emotional pain. No one has ever described a human peak performance, has ever characterized it as painful emotionally. It's the opposite of that. So from pain to, now here's the part that really gets me, but captures my attention. So the transition from pain to performance begins with understanding the patterns, habits, and stories often unconsciously embedded within an organizational culture that hinder the leader's ability to maximize the talent of their teams. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So we don't live out of facts. We live out of stories. And what I mean by that is that this is how you can check it for yourself. A fact has absolutely no energy around it. It's never good or bad. It just is. The second it has energy, the second we decide something is good or bad, it drops into more of an interpretation, and then we create a story. Once we have a story, we tend to not want to lose that story. We turn that story into facts. We think our story is actually factual. And then once we have that story, we do what I call, we build armies. Because if we're going to have a story, we want to be right about it. As a human being, we have a conscience, right? So a good person is always right? We want to feel justified if we have a story, especially if it's a story about somebody else or something. And so how do we feel right? We build an army. We go out and we talk to people and we get consensus. And so once we get agreement to our story, we begin to think that our story is fact, and we treat it as if it's fact, even if it's not. We might be seeing a little bit of that in our society today. Just
I don't know what you're talking about. But that's not just okay. Yeah, that's funny, but it's always been true, right? It's the human experience, right? Okay, so you're speaking my language right now, right? Because as a mental toughness coach, I spend so much time with people identifying what are your stories. And questioning them, being in inquiry, being a state of self-inquiry, right? Saying, do I agree with is my story serving me? Can I know it to be true, right? Is it serving me? Is it serving the world? So I am really particularly interested, because I don't think you and I have ever, I mean, you know, we've had a million dialogues, but I don't know if we've ever actually spoken directly to the question, like, Jelaine, how would you define, or what language would you use? What would you translate mental toughness into in the context of what you do in the world?
So that's a really interesting question, right? Because mental toughness is not, typically my language.
Right.
And then, but when I think about that, it's very strong. It's very powerful. And so when I break that down for me, I actually see it as three components. In a lot of the coaching work that I do with people, is I look at it from a three-phase position. I think the first step for me about mental toughness would be letting go of attachment and the ability to move into preference. And the way I define attachment is that whenever is fear, right? It's when you feel like you have to have something or not have something to be happy. When we can actually let go of that attachment, it could be losing your job, it could be losing your company, it could be losing clients. When we can really let go of fear, almost facing that rock bottom that I think every human being hits at some point in our life, And it's being able to let go of all the attachment around what that means and know that we can still not just survive, but we can thrive. We can move forward into preference. And the difference between attachment and preference is when you're attached, your happiness depends on having or not having what you're talking about. Preference is when you know you can have it or not have it and be okay, so you can choose what you want.
Wow.
And it lightens to me, it's energetic, it's spiritual, it just let goes of all the threads, because what you resist persists, right? So to me, the first step is letting go of attachment and moving into preference. But then that's actually the easy part, and that's not easy. Okay.
Okay.
So that, and I'll give you an example. For instance, when I first started my business, so I was really lucky. I did a lot of stuff when I was in college at ASU, started a number of programs that kind of went national, had a pretty good reputation, graduated at 21, had a number of job offers, but they weren't exactly what I wanted to do. And my parents, of course, were like, of course you're going to take a job offer. Well, no, but I was young and I thought, well, but if I get locked into a job now, I may never do my passion. And yet, the fear that everybody had around me, well, you can't turn down these job offers. One CEO said to me, look, if you work for us for 1 year, I'll open enough corporate doors to last you 12. And a huge amount of money for 21 years of age.
Okay.
But I had to think to myself, what do I really want? And I literally had to see myself losing everything in order to turn down those jobs. I had to see myself as a bag lady on the street. And it sounds funny, but I had to let go of everything. What if I lost everything? What if I had no money? What if I had nothing? What if I completely failed? I saw myself living on the streets. How would I survive? How would I keep from getting attacked at night? How would I find food if I didn't have any? I mean, I went through the whole gamut.
Okay.
And that's what I mean by letting go of all attachment. When I could see myself in the worst case scenario and know that I'd be okay, that's when I very clearly could say no to every job offer that came my way. And I started my consulting business. Took me 6 months to get it off the ground. I had to substitute teach to pay some bills.
That's not very long, actually.
No, and then I've been flying ever since.
Wow.
And I've been very lucky to be able to say I've always had a passion. I've never had a job, right? So that's
hold on. You think you're lucky for that? You think that's luck?
Well, no.
I would never identify you as lucky in that regard. I would say that you were determined. Like that is true because of the decision you just described.
But on the flip side, when a lot of people hit serious rock bottom. And I was going to say that really close friend of mine had a thriving company, multi-million-dollar company, lost everything in the divorce. Right, went through a bad divorce, had lost everything. Not an uncommon story. Letting go of attachment for him was having to let go of what he had built for years, multi-millions, and go to work for minimum wage just to be able to see his kids and make his child support payments while he was getting back on his feet. That is also letting go of attachment. It's letting go of attachment to what success looks like, what failure looks like, what self looks like, and all of that.
Okay.
And to be able to still get up and go to work.
Right on.
Those are the spectrums, right? Mine was a fun story, but there's a spectrum to the same story.
And that's step number 1, you said.
Step number 1.
And then?
So step number 2 is that especially when we hit rock bottom, we get those tapes, those stories about ourselves, sometimes implied from other people, especially when it's a failure. When our rock bottom, we have to let go of attachment to what success looks like, to what it means to us. We start to have interpretations of ourselves, right? We have stories that we tell about ourselves. That's where the real work comes in, because I'm sure you've studied this, but with mirror neurons, right? What we know today is that whatever our story is about ourselves, it's going to get reflected in others, where others are going to show up and reflect that story back to us. So we had to take responsibility for breaking down all the negative stories that we have that aren't serving us and redefine them, because they're not facts. They are just stories. They're not true. Any story that we tend to have about ourselves, we could pretty much challenge it that it's not true 100% of the time. So therefore it's not a fact. It's a moment. And so we can take a look at what those stories are. And here's an example, right? When I first started my business, right? So going back to me, when I saw myself as the youngest person in the room delivering courses, I was seen as a very young person. When I went to Africa and saw myself as the white American, I was seen as the white American. If I saw myself on a board of directors as the only woman in the room, I was seen as the only woman in the room. When I saw myself as the expert who was there because of what I brought to the table, I was seen as the expert and what I brought to the table. So that when I talk about stories, we have to really dig deep and take a look. And oftentimes we want to blame, because we see it, because of mirror neurons, there's a lot of data to back up our stories. That's personal response. To me, that's mental toughness.
Okay, can I ask you a clarifying question about that? Because I think that's huge. Sure. And that's tremendously powerful. So you're saying the way you saw yourself is the way that you then would influence other people to see you, to experience you. Right?
It's mirror neurons. What you think about yourself shows up.
Right. Okay. So what did it take for you to stop seeing yourself as the young woman, as the white American, and rather as the expert at the table with a contribution to make that's significant, important, and relevant and timely? What did it take for you to do that?
Right. So it means unraveling those stories. It means sometimes digging into the pain, digging into where they come from, because they also come from experiences. I mean, that's the catch-22. What we think about ourselves shows up. So then we get reflected back, and sometimes some pretty harsh experiences, which then validate that story. So we have to dig in and really work through it and take some personal responsibility for it, in terms of our own belief systems, and be able to let go of being a victim. There's a lot of satisfaction in being able to say, this happened to me, I was a victim, that kind of thing. And it can feel really, really good to sometimes just be miserable. And then when the pain of being miserable, has run its course, then sometimes it's easier than to let it go and take a different look. I'm not saying to negate the pain, by the way. I'm not into, well, you are so responsible for your own emotions. You're choosing to feel pain if you've had painful experience. I'm not saying that. I'm actually saying embrace it. And guess what? When you're done, when you're ready to move on, you can actually, just because you had that experience doesn't mean that it's who you are. Okay. And you can then reconfigure it.
So let me organize my thoughts. So mental toughness, by your definition, is three things. The first thing is attachment versus preference, right? Yep. Acknowledging your stories. Or is that the second step?
Well, the second step is, it's really digging into your stories, your tapes. If I were to put an analogy to it, right? And I'm dating myself. We can have this conversation, but I don't know how much longer we can have this conversation. But if you think of a movie projector, that's why I say I'm dating myself. Right. So here's a movie projector and here's a screen. And the projector, the tape, is our belief systems. It's our judgments, it's our thoughts, it's our beliefs, it's our stories. The light projects a tape onto the screen. The screen is our life experience. Too often people focus on changing the screen, the life experience. You're in one bad relationship, you break up. Right. And all of a sudden you're dating the same person, different body, because we're changing the screen. The only way to change the screen is we have to go back and change the tapes.
So you're talking about inner world versus outer world.
Correct. But it's an interesting thing. I mean, it's interesting how quickly when you start to work with it, it can affect you. For instance, one time I was working in Uganda. This was in 1996.
Yeah, who hasn't done that?
Right? But so it was 1996, and I wanted to go gorilla trekking in Rwanda, and I was in Kampala, and I have absolutely no sense of direction and no sense of geography. I actually don't really have a lot of scope in that area. So I just decided to hire a car and driver, and I thought, well, on the map, Uganda looked really small next to Rwanda, so I was just going to have a car and driver drive me down to Rwanda so I can go gorilla trekking. I didn't realize it was a 13-and-a-half-hour drive. So we get to Rwanda, and it was in 96. So the genocide had just ended in 94, but it was really, really palpable.
Wow.
And we get there, and it's getting close to the end of the evening, or towards the evening, like 5:30 p.m. The sun's going down, and I had to get out of the car to walk to the passport office in this really dodgy border crossing. And I look around, and there's all these drunk men looking at me. I'm the only white American woman there. And the first thing, this is also how mirror neurons work, is they had their story in that moment about me, and I picked up on it, and I reflected it back, which meant I was, they were sharing with me how they might have felt about me, and I felt scared. I remember looking at my driver, doing what I consider the typical woman thing to see if he was going to take care of me, and he was walking with his head down and trying to ignore the whole situation. So that's when I also realized, okay, these are two tapes going on. I'm scared of them. They know I'm scared. They have their feelings about me and who I represent. And so I shifted. In that moment, I just let it all go. I shifted. I actually decided, because I'd worked with gangs at that time, that I was going to access my inner gang member. I let go of all my fear. I let go of my, all the tapes that were being projected, felt really confident in who I was, and the men just disappeared. They all blended away.
Wow.
It was an amazing thing. And that's how Mirror Neurons works.
You know what that reminds me of?
Tell me.
E011.
Yes.
Remember her book Left to Tell?
Yes.
She was the survivor,
yes.
so she entitled her book Left to
yes.
Tell, because she's
yes.
the only person left from her family from the genocide to tell the story.
Right.
I have goosebumps right now, because that's like, she told similar stories. Like, that's fascinating. Okay, so here we go. Let's call that a skill.
But that's where it becomes like shifting gears on a car. I'm going to age myself again. I don't think kids today know how to drive stick shift, but I grew up driving stick shift. And I remember the first time I ever tried to put in the clutch, shift gears and drive straight at the same time, I didn't think I could do it. And then in a short time, it became automatic. You don't even think about putting in the clutch and shifting gears. That's how working with your tapes, to me, mental toughness, recognizing mirror neurons, recognize that whatever the experience you're having externally is triggering a belief that you have internally, and recognizing that you can change it. It becomes like shifting gears on a car.
Wow.
But you can't do it unless you have the third piece,
okay.
which is taking responsibility for your personal resilience. I define resiliency as that if we're alive, we are resilient. But are we practicing positive or negative resiliency? And that is the key. Most of us get trapped at some point in our lives in negative resiliency. For instance, you wake up in the morning, you drink coffee all day, you turn to some kind of alcohol at night, and then what's common in America is then a sleeping pill to go to bed, right? Okay. I work with my CEOs and there's a problem with that?
Yeah,
you
right.
Describe my day. But and then we're not sleeping, we're overeating, we're not exercising, we don't have any kind of mindfulness practice at all. It hurts our relationships, we have divorce, we have alcoholism, we have pharmaceutical addictions. All those things are on the negative resiliency. We're still alive, but it's on the negative side. Whereas positive resiliency is prioritizing your time with family and loved ones. It's being mindful. It's having mindful practices in your life, or meditation practices in your life. For me, it's hiking or moving my body. For some people, it's sitting meditation. It's taking responsibility for what for altering your brain or not altering your brain when you're under stress, whether it's with caffeine or with alcohol or whatever it is. And in order to be able to me, shift our tapes, right? To shift gears like a car, to take that and be mentally tough and take ownership, is that we have to be putting a practice of positive resiliency into our life every day. Otherwise, we flip to negative, and then it's too easy to fall into like the victim and the depression and everything.
So, you know how I feel about the fact that this stuff isn't fundamentally incorporated as curriculum from early on in our educational system. So that, in other words, this is why most of us have had, this is news, right? Like, why most of us don't have access to these practices or techniques, right? So what the reason you reminded me of Immaculate is because you're in the same place in the world, right? And you had what happened was you had an experience that you realized you were co-creating. Not that she wasn't co-creating. She wasn't co-creating the Holocaust, or the genocide. She was co-creating her participation in it and the way that she would influence other people. So part of her story, you know the story. You know her.
Yeah.
Did you read her book? Okay, so they got found. She was hiding in a bathroom with the 6 or 7 other women, and she had been reading the Bible. So her approach to this came from a biblical source. But who cares, right? It's like you get there, and she discovered. And that's one of the fascinating things, is she could call it like God, or we could call it you could call it mental toughness. I mean, maybe those terms to some people are synonymous. I don't know. But what she learned is that she could, she just chose to operate. She chose to change her internal experience.
Correct.
So this dude found her. He's got a machete. She had heard her family get slaughtered outside prior to this. She had every reason to cower and be petrified. And she chose love.
Right.
She chose to silently, without a single word spoken, she chose to express compassion, forgiveness, and love. And the dude walked away. And she had that similar experience 2 or 3 times.
Right.
Right. So you had a similar experience. Now, I don't know that your life was threatened, but the energetics of it are the same. The mirror neural experience is identical. You changed your inner state. Go ahead.
Well, let me give you another example that happened to a really close friend of mine. And this was like, she told me this story 25 years ago. It's probably, she subliminally planted this in my psyche way back when I was in my early 20s.
Cool.
Where she was sitting in her apartment and had a skylight. And actually, she came home one day, but her apartment had a skylight. She walked in, shut the door, turned around, and there was a man naked with a full-on, erection and a knife, saying, aggressively saying he was there to rape her.
Wow.
And she put her bags down and she said, okay, I'm not going to fight you on this, but I'm going to have to do some deep breathing to prepare for this experience. And she shut her eyes and just started to breathe. And she said she opened her eyes. He was sitting on her couch, deflated, knife on the table. He said, I can't rape you. Because there was no violent. Rape is violent, right? She shifted, again, the same thing that you just talked about the maculae, what I was talking about with my experience in Uganda, and she talks about it in terms of almost being raped. When you let go of your resistance, when you go internally and you shift, there's nothing for somebody to come at you with. You're now in control. You're now in the power. And he walked out of the apartment and left.
I'm sure a lot of people will hear this and feel instantly skeptical about it. All right, but this is at least at worst what we can say is explore it. Just explore that. Explore. So and you're describing a practice. So our friend Byron Katie.
Yes.
Who's doing a 9-day workshop starting today. As a matter of fact, I have several friends out there in Ojai, California, at it. So the story that's relevant to what we're saying right now of her, do you know the story where she was doing one of her 9-day experiences? And some crazed dude came up when they were on break. She was out in the foyer, came up with a gun and said, bitch, I'm going to kill you because you're screwing with these people's minds and you're stealing their money. He literally had a gun in her rib. You don't know this story. He had a gun in her rib cage. I only know this because when I coached with Steve Hardison, he is her coach. And so we get these great stories. And her immediate response, and it could only be this with years of reprogramming the stories, her immediate unpremeditated response was, oh, sweetie, honey, she's calling this fucking guy honey and sweetie, right? He's threatening to kill her, and he's going, sweetie, I don't blame you one bit. If I were believing the thoughts that you're believing, hell, I would have shot me already, honey, I don't blame you. And then he just broke down. Right. I don't think either of us are in a position to say that would always be the outcome, but isn't that it? But all these stories that we're referring to, that they even ever occurred, needs to be acknowledged. So let's now break this down into thinking about the people that are listening, right? We're talking, let's go from the theoretical to the practical here and give them some gifts here. So that's taking it back to your story where you were wanting to go on the gorilla trek and you saw all these drunk dudes and you changed your vibe. I'm putting words in your mouth.
Yep, that's a great way of putting it.
Okay. If you had to teach somebody how to do that, what do you tell them?
Well, even just going back to Byron Katie's story, and even the story that I shared about the friend of mine who was almost raped, or my story, it's, what you resist persists. So that goes back to what I first said about letting go of attachment. Mm-hmm. When we resist not having money, when we resist not having our business, thrive in a certain way, or not having the relationship that we want, or whatever it is, then that's exactly what we're going to get reflected back. That's mirror neurons. If we resist it, there's a fear there, and we're going to continue to keep attracting those same pieces, right? Okay. So how do you shift that? A lot of what we're talking about, at least in my personal stories, like in Rwanda, is and this is also kind of, a little bit of what's happening in our world today, is we're doing more dehumanizing than remembering that we're also human. What you just described with Byron Katie is she acknowledged the guy's humanity. Yeah. She acknowledged him as a human being. Yeah. And another example that I have on my stories, when I used to work with gangs, and one time I was working in South Phoenix and I had to park far away because there was construction. I'm walking down the street and there's all these gang members, and they saw me by myself and started making very loud, derogatory comments to me. And again, I got scared. And I realized, okay, that's what was going into play. And what I did in that moment, not saying this is what everyone should do, is I ended up walking up to them and introducing myself to them. Because I knew.
Well, I have absolutely no difficulty believing that.
But what was happening is that they had their stories about me without knowing who I was. And I had my story about them in Phoenix. South Phoenix. And I had my story about them without knowing who I was. The moment I introduced myself, the story is dissipated. We're two human beings looking at each other.
That's okay. So that can be dangerous advice to someone, right? Because like when you've made that decision, though. So okay, let's try to break this down just a little bit, so I think it's more accessible to everyone. That's a ballsy move, Jelaine. That's a risky ass move. That'd be like, but you have training, and that's the only reason you see. The only reason Byron Katie is even remotely capable of not instantly going into a fear state when a gun's in her ribcage and dudes threaten to use it on her is because of decades of practice, right? Of restoring, of freeing herself up from old stories that she knows doesn't serve her. She has freed herself from fear response. That's her choice. We don't all need to do that, but it's a possibility, obviously. You have as well. Right? Maybe not to the same degree, but certainly to a degree that's more than most. I'm very comfortable saying that because that's ballsy as hell, right? So a person with a black belt, okay, is more comfortable going. They don't experience situations as threatening as someone like me without that training.
So you just brought up a good point. Let's how to break this down, because you're right. I would not necessarily recommend that to everybody, but I was also there was a danger either way. Had I not humanized myself, I could have gotten attacked. There was definitely that vibe in the air. So that's probably a bad situation because it could have gone either way. But by humanizing, by changing the story in that instant, they ended up walking to me where I needed to go. And they even said to me, "Hey, lady, you really shouldn't be down here by yourself at night."
They were looking out after you after that.
So I'm not saying use that one, but
okay.
But the point is,
so wait, just clarify. You're saying don't walk up to gang members. You're not recommending that. But here's the point you're making, right? Where I was talking about the black belt analogy.
Right.
That you right.
Oh. Right. Well, this is the deal. Part of what you're talking about, and I don't know if I believe it takes years of training. It takes conscious training. So when you mention martial arts, right? One thing that we are gifted with our brain is neuroplasticity, which means any conditioned pattern that we have, we can actually transform it. That is the gift that we have, whether you believe in God or the universe, whatever you believe. We were created, unlike many other species, to have neuroplasticity. Why do we train for martial arts? And we know this when it comes to martial arts. You train every day if you practice martial arts because someone attacks you. You can't think, hit here, punch here, do this. Your body does what it's been trained to do. We know this in the military. I work a lot with law enforcement. Why do law enforcement practice shooting their guns? Because if they have to use it in the moment, they can't think what to do or where to shoot. They go into whatever they've been conditioned to do. It's in our reptilian brain. We have yet to approach leadership the same way. And we need to be approaching leadership the same conditioning process for how we show up in conflict, for how we manage our stories. All these things that we talked about is a conditioning process.
Yes.
And we need to train for it, just like we train for martial arts, just like we train for sports. I mean, the athletes. You know this from coaching athletes. You train because in that moment when you're on an adrenaline rush, you can't think how to hit the ball, what to do. Your body does what it's been trained to do. In fact, if your mind interferes, you can screw it up. So you go into what you've been trained to do. We have to train ourselves in leadership, in communication, in relationship with other people, the same way we train for sports or martial arts or any other practice that we have.
So I love what you're saying about it doesn't need to take decades, right? It doesn't necessarily need to take decades. It just so happens that people like Byron Katie have been training herself for decades. And then reap the rewards of that because she doesn't choose fear as a response to reality.
We share a 5-step process. Really simple.
Beautiful.
How do we do this?
Perfect. Beautiful.
First, especially if you have a pattern that you want to change. It's a story, it's a pattern. The first thing you have to do is recognize it. The second thing you have to do is reject it. Now, when you reject, it means release. It means releasing your attachment. If you find yourself rationalizing why the person deserved the anger that you showed or whatever it is, you're not rejecting, and you're going to go back into the pattern. Okay. So you have to recognize it, you have to reject it, and then you have to replace it. That's the missing part. We tend to say what we don't want. I want to lose weight. I want to be a better person. I want to be a better partner. I don't want to yell at my kids. We say what we don't want. We don't replace it with what we do want. The only way to build a new neural pathway is to replace. So if you don't want to yell at your kids anymore, what do you want? I had to practice this one. I wanted to be more patient. and loving, right? So then you have to go for repetition. You have to go for what I call the easy wins. So when I found myself yelling at my son and I decided I recognized it, I wanted to reject it, and I knew I wanted to replace it with being more patient, the repetition that I found was to go into his room because I knew it was going to be filthy and make me mad. So I consciously go in there and instead of yelling, I would start to say, okay, honey, I get that you chose not to have your Xbox this weekend. And when you want to have your Xbox back, I'll see a clean room. Thanks. Let me know when it works for you. And then I'd walk out, right? Mm-hmm. But now I don't go to yelling anymore. Now my conditioned pattern, because of the repetition, is I go to a patient conversation place with him versus yelling. But if I didn't replace it, that's the key. If we're going to let go of one story, we have to replace it with something else. So if we want to let go of one behavior, we have to replace it. With my executives, I had one that got back on his performance evaluation. He was a micromanager, and nobody wanted to work for him again. Well, what did he want to let? He wanted to let go of that, happening. So what did he want to replace it with? He wanted his people to know that he appreciated them. So then he had to find a way to show his appreciation authentically, right? Because they didn't think of him as being authentic, saying nice things. So he had to find a way to do it authentically where they got it, and then it became second nature. A year later, he had an outstanding performance evaluation and ended up getting a promotion. So the key is to recognize, reject, release,
replace,
then
repeat,
and then repeat, and then you're done.
Wait a minute, I only got 4 there. I thought you said it was a 5-step process.
Recognize,
reject, replace.
Release it. No, you have to release it. When you reject it, you have to release. And the difference is that you're releasing or you're rationalizing. If you start to rationalize, you're just going to stay in the pattern. So you actually have to release whatever it is, and that means forgiving yourself for whatever you've done.
Yeah, I see.
Okay. Then you have to replace, and then you have to repeat.
That is beautiful. That is so practical. I love that. But it all starts with, so now this is what distinguishes physical fitness with mental fitness, is this is all internal.
Right.
So it's awareness. It's all predicated upon awareness, isn't it? Right? For me to recognize anything, I have to be in the, so it's really, there might even be a step before that, which would be the initiator, which is to practice paying attention to what? Like what would help someone, like even just like, okay, we're going to get started in this. Do you have a name for this? The 5 steps to, or 5 steps for? So
it's part of the curriculum that I've written, where I talk about them going back to the mood projector, and it's like rewriting your script, basically. Rewrite your script. Pieces. It's in that. It's in a whole.
Rewriting your script.
To rewrite your life.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So.
But that's what the recognition. The recognition is that you can, especially you can stay as a victim, right, where everyone's out to get you, and that's a screen. Or you can take a look at, okay, if you're having some similar situations occurring and you're not happy with the result, are you ready to?
Okay, so there you go. That's it. That's what I was looking for. That's what I was looking for. That's perfect. So there you go. Can't get simpler than that. That I love. I love simplifying all this stuff, right? So that's it. Is where are you creating results? Right, or even we'll even like make it more victim-y than that, so it's even easier.
Right.
Where's stuff going wrong in your life? Right. That's total victim language. Like, where's all this shit that's going wrong in your life? Then it's like, okay, now let's recognize it. So it's easy to recognize, right? Reject it, release it, replace it with what does perfect look like? Is a fine question for that. To say replace it with what? Well, what would be ideal? And then repeat the shit out of it, and you've got a new way of being.
Well, and this, right, and just to say one last thing, sorry, Chris, but this is where language is important, and I know that this is what you're really, really good at. Like say like New Year's is coming up in a few months, and people always have a New Year's resolution to lose weight. Well, if you think about losing weight, your image of yourself is really bad. Whereas I want to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. I want to be fit for my grandkids. Totally different image of self. So when we talk about that replacement, it's all in the language. What language are you using? Because that's what you're going to be visualizing. That's what you're going to be attracting back in your mirror neurons.
I would never want to do this without a coach.
Right.
Because as I listen to you, just a clarification like that one that you just made is a game changer. And it reminds me of like when, I'm learning golf and how hard it is when you're doing it on your own.
Right.
And little tweaks like that, the instructor will come up and just say, just move your hand. And then suddenly you're like, whoa, the results, like that tweak right there. That's beautiful. So it's not just, okay, so losing weight is the resolution. Don't envision just, like, I'm heavy now, let me envision myself as thin because that makes me better. It's like, no, for what, right? Visualizing, because I want to be in shape. I want to be like that commercial. I want to be able to, hike the Santa Monica stairs, walk the stairs with my granddaughter,
Right.
as opposed to say, not today. Yeah, right on. That's beautiful. The work that you do, we didn't get too much into. You just referenced it a second ago. Maybe just talk for a second more about this because it's so fascinating to me. You're working with teams all over the planet, right? You're working with the police, right, around the nation. But you also travel globally, and you do this work where you're helping. Are you working? Who else do you work with that you can talk about? Who are you allowed to talk about who you work with?
So I do work a lot with our federal government and a lot with corporations. So Fortune 50 companies, Fortune 100 companies, governments, as well as in local organizations. And it's all the same work. And so, really, so a lot of what I do right now is it's about transformation. It's about change and transformation. Change is never difficult. It's only difficult if people aren't having the right conversation on the right topic at the right time, right? If people say change is hard, it's only because they're not talking about the right thing. I define leadership as that leadership is all about relationships, and the conversations are, make the relationships. If you want to find out how you're leading, take a look at your conversations. And are they landing where, the first time, or are you having to have lots of different kind of conversations? And so, I coach, I train, I work with organizations on massive transformation, working on a huge transformation project right now, which hopefully will keep our country safe in the future. And
without divulging anything that would be confidential, could you at least say what is the transformation from to in that particular case?
So we live in an ever-changing environment. This is important for every organization. We live in a digital age. And if we do not know how to, and so now what's required for every organization, it doesn't matter who the organization is. What's required in our organizations today is agility. It's, and a capacity to keep growing and not get stuck, right? And we are creatures of habit. We like habits, we like patterns, we like roadmaps, we like things to say, to stay consistent. We don't live in an age of consistency anymore. And so training people into just being comfortable with agility, that's the key for every organization's success.
Mm-hmm. So the transformation that'll help keep our world safer. Gosh, come on. Give us a little bit more.
I'm working
from consistency.
I'm working on, so it used to be that we could be very reactive in our world.
Okay, right. And that's what you're talking about, the police. You mentioned that very, very quickly a few minutes ago.
We could be reactive. I'm just talking about in general, right? We could wait for something to happen in our country, and we can't be reactive anymore. We have to actually be predictive. In today's world, in any organization, it's important to be more predictive to understand where things are going to happen so that you know where to put your product. I'm talking corporations now, or anybody with a business. We need to be predicting our marketplace, the world that we live in, so we'll know how to place where we're going to be. If we wait for a problem to show up and then solve the problem, then we're already behind the times. And for a long time, I think most organizations, most of us, especially if we're in the self-help business, have waited for a problem to emerge, and that's when we get called in to help solve the problem.
Yeah.
Then we're behind the times. Then you're playing catch up, right?
Wow.
So now it's about being predictive. So a lot of my clients is how to predict where things are headed next and to prepare for it and to be agile in that process.
And so psychologically speaking, how do you prepare for what you're predicting? Psychologically speaking.
You have to be open to getting outside of your own boxes, right? So think outside the box and to be open to play. I mean, I think that we need to bring much more play and creativity into what we're doing every day. And we don't. And then we get very locked in. And a lot of us are trained with these very systematic minds where if you're going to tell me to do something different, I need to have the evidence to support it, and I need to have the roadmap. Well, that's not how the world that we live in works today. And so having to, again, create a new neural pathway. If you know that that's your modality, how do you get comfortable with innovation, creativity, outside the box, agility, unpredictability? And so that's where that 5-step process comes in too, having to on it. And
the 5 steps to reauthoring your script, right? Exercising the authority that we all were born with to reauthor the script so that we can show up in the world the way that we were designed to be. You know, the world is a better place because of you, Jelaine. You know I mean that when I say it. Are you there? We just got a glitch. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we got.
Okay, good, because this is important. Because I'm thanking you. I don't want you. Don't Skype. Don't mess this up. This is a touching moment. I need technology to cooperate. Yeah, I'm a better person because of you. I am, and now I mean that. I am more global thinking. That's my second favorite thing about you. The first is your amazing laugh. Is your
now
beautiful?
I'm not gonna laugh.
There you go. We got one earlier. One I didn't want to point it out so you become self-conscious, but it's free. It's beautiful. This is the takeaway. One of the takeaways for our peeps today is the 5-step. Rewriting your script, and that's strengthening the inner world, recognizing your story, rejecting the story, asking yourself what's not cool in my life, or what's quote going wrong, right? Where can I upgrade? Recognize the story you have about it, reject that story, release the story then, right, and replace it with the new story, and then repeat it. And that's very practical and useful. Again, so a couple things to thank you for. One, for the time. For making the time today. I know you're busy as hell, traveling the world. You are all over the place all the time, so I really appreciate you're making time. The second is for the contribution that you have made to my own personal development, and I look forward to that, never stopping. But the third and the biggest one is for your contribution to this planet. Oh. You make a huge difference, Jillian. You know you do. You probably don't hear it enough. I bet you do hear it a lot, but I hope you don't get used to it, because it's a big goddamn deal. Your presence on this planet is having us all live more fully, happily, more safely, more consciously. You are accelerating the growth curve of our collective consciousness, and for that, I adore you.
Well, thank you. It's really great to connect with you. And you, Chris, are one of my heroes. So just being in your presence makes everybody feel better about life.
Jelaine, how do you want people to connect with you if they have questions for you, if somebody wants to hire you or ask a clarifying question or whatever? Where do we send them?
Leadwithconversations.com.
Leadwithconversations.
Yes.
Leadwithconversations plural.com. Lead with, and we'll put that right. That'll be
perfect.
Here. Okay, Jelaine, thanks again so much.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, take care.